Hello, everybody. Welcome to our next meeting of Wrocławska Grupa .NET and Krakowska Grupa .NET. We are really great to welcome you with our two special guests, Matthias Koch, which will describe being a productive .NET developer with JetBrains Rider, and Idan Schatz, which discuss the advanced debugging techniques for building a .NET application on Docker microservices. We'll start in a second, but first some organizational issues.
First off, we would like to thank all our sponsors who support us all the time, especially now during the pandemic. So we want to thank every component that you can see on the screen. Many thanks goes to Entrance Solutions, RevDebug, Pirios, Gain Capital, Forte Digital, Avanade, Making Waves, JetBrains, and Webio.
We strongly encourage you to follow us on social media. Recently, we started our LinkedIn profiles. Every like, every retweet is appreciated. Right now, in this pandemic time, it's an only option to address to be able to access the special audience, and we would like to promote ourselves in the social media, and therefore we like to and therefore we like to be extremely grateful for every like that you share with us.
Three important announcements regarding the .NET conferences. We are pleased to announce that we became a community partner of JetBrains.NET Days Online 2021. This is a free virtual event devoted to .NET technologies, and Matthias promised that he can tell a little bit more about this conference.
Yeah, a couple of things. So this will take place on Tuesday, Wednesday of May 11th and 12th. And we had a call of papers up front. So we picked some of the as we think best agenda and lineup that we could think of from very different areas, including plain C#, of course, high performance. I'm just going through the list here, gRPC. So I think it will be quite interesting, and we would be really happy to welcome many people there with your questions.
So you can get more details by scanning this QR code. It's a link to the official website of the event. And we became a community partner of another conference. It's a Polish conference devoted to architecture and containers. And today we get a special guest, Piotr Stab, who is one of the co-organizers of this conference. And I promise that I allow him to steal a little bit of our airtime to invite you to this conference. So time is yours.
Okay, so I would like to invite you to this conference. Architecture in container sounds strange in English. So architecture and containers, it's 100% free. It's we have selected, I hope so, the best Polish speakers about containers. Now I can present you Łukasz Kaulny, who will talk about distributed application runtime, which is a new Microsoft tool which is going to CNF Foundation. The second one is Tomasz Chalewa, who will talk about how to get your software to the production or ASAP. And the third one, it's Waldemar Panas from Allegro, who will talk about test containers. The more speakers will be announced really soon, I hope so, next week. I know them already, but they didn't give me the exactly text which I should present on the website. So if you would like to join us, you will be really warm welcome, and I hope so. We will see it on 7th of May this year. Thank you very much for inviting me today.
Thanks, Piotr. And we are highly encourage you to register to the conference. It's free, and of course, by scanning this QR code, let's hold it from moment, you can access the official website where is more information about the conference.
And the last information from our community partner, the For Developer, the biggest interdisciplinary IT conference in Poland, which takes place in May. It's got over 100 presentations and 14 different tracks. And we strongly encourage you to register this conference for Wrocławska Grupa .NET, Krakowska Grupa .NET. We have a 15% discount. So if you like to register, please use our code, so you will have a discount.
Okay, I think this is the most important announcement. As always, we got a survey. You can access it by scanning this QR code or by clicking the link below this video. You can send, using this survey, you can send your feedback about this, about today's meeting and rate today's presentations. From those of you who fill out the survey, we will raffle a gift from our sponsors. We got licenses for JetBrains products, Entrian Solutions, we got a subscription for Pluralsight, and we got 2 vouchers for IT books. The survey stays open till Sunday evening, so if you are not watching us today live, you will still get an opportunity to rate those presentations when you watch the recording.
Okay, and as usual, we strongly encourage you to be a part of our groups, to become a speaker. For this season, we have all tracks already set, but for the next season, there is a time to prepare your presentation and to start your own presentation journey right here. We can help you with your with the presentation, with the plan for it. So we recommend you to contact us by the social media links that we've provided earlier. And Cezary, it starts to.
Yes, I think that's all from the announcement. So it's presentation time. Over to Matthias. The mic is yours. Good luck.
Okay.
Good luck.
Okay. I shared my screen already.
Yes, I'm starting it. Okay.
Okay, cool. All right, then let's start with the first topic. I'm not actually sure what we've put onto the meetup site, but never mind, these are my slides, because I would also like to give a rough introduction into Rider. And contrary, and I hope you didn't expect something else, but I won't cover too much of the more recent things, because I think it's next week. We will also have a dedicated webinar that we do together with all our advocates, and focus a bit on the most recent editions that we have in the latest 2021.1 release. Okay, so my goal here is more to provide a very basic introduction to Rider, to know how to use the tool, also a bit of history. That's something that I actually start with, and and I hope you enjoy it. So let's start. Actually, first of all, I would like to say a few things about the architecture that we use. So some may not know about that already, but Rider almost started at the same time when .NET Core came up, so around that time frame. And of course, we wanted to have a cross-platform IDE that also feels the same on all operating systems, right? And so what we thought is we have ReSharper as the .NET extension for Visual Studio, but we need a front end for all the other operating systems and be independent of Visual Studio because of that. So what we use for that is the IntelliJ platform, which already runs on the JVM and which powers most, probably all the rest of our products that we have besides ReSharper, which are like RubyMine, IntelliJ for Java, whatever you can think of, PyCharm. And the interesting, or the challenge here was to bring ReSharper as an actual host, which either runs, back then it was .NET Framework on Windows and Mono on Unix machines. So first, that meanwhile also has changed. So particularly on macOS, on Linux, it's running on .NET Core now. And that just runs as a separate process. Okay, and now the question is, how do these two communicate with each other? And the solution back then was something, was a lightweight protocol implemented in Kotlin, which is actually open source for a while already. I don't exactly know when they decided that. If you want to check that out, it's available on GitHub under JetBrains/RD. So I won't bother posting the link because it's really just RD. And that's our protocol. And that is used to synchronize all the various processes that are involved in Rider. And moreover, the interesting thing here is that this actually has multiple of use cases inside Rider. So it's not just the ReSharper host that this is based on, but also, for instance, the integration that we have with the Unity editor or with the Unreal editor. As far as I know, and I hope I don't say something stupid, but I think also the Roslyn workspace would run in a secondary process. About the debugger, I'm not too sure right now, but yeah, I think you get the idea. And something very worth to point out is that there's quite a high number. Also, please don't pin me on the exact number, but there's quite a large amount of code that is shared between ReSharper and Rider. So something that cannot be shared is first all the UI relevant part. So of course, everything, if we had settings pages, for instance, based on XAML or Windows Forms, then these obviously can't run on the JVM. And the second thing is everything that is related to front-end technologies. So instead of using the support for JavaScript and TypeScript from ReSharper, we actually have chosen to use everything that comes from WebStorm, because also IntelliJ and all the other IDEs, they work highly in a how do you say, as components, more or less. And that basically made it possible to just drag in WebStorm with it and bring support for front-end stuff. Another part that is really of benefit for us for moving Rider forward and bringing more features in and giving you a good experience is that we inherit all the features that the IntelliJ team implements. And those features are typically more, how to say, language agnostic. So they are not tightly related to .NET. But they do matter in the context of software development, of course. So, for instance, we have VCS integration, which comes from IntelliJ, the whole command line handling, bookmarks, custom themes. Something that I particularly like was when we introduced support for the MacBook Touch Bar, for instance. We didn't have to do anything. It basically just worked when we pulled in the latest IntelliJ IDEA changes. And so I could start having some run configurations showing up on my touch bar. And of course, this is also a very large benefit, and I haven't updated that number for a long time, actually. The IntelliJ IDEA ecosystem is full of plugins for everything you can think of, basically. Okay, and with that said, I think it's demo time. So one thing I will tell you, actually, because I think it's worth telling, even if you don't join the our webinar, which should be on next Monday, I think, is how does Rider look now with the latest version? And something quite interesting that I very much like is from the welcome screen now you can attach to processes. And I'm currently on Mac, but if you were on Windows, for instance, you would see, as an example, I tried this on my Windows machine, you would see other processes that use .NET. Snagit, for instance, I just noticed it uses .NET 2. And this is a very very convenient approach to, if you have an application already running and you just want to start debugging it. Also, my usual tip that I have to make, and unfortunately right now my toolbox is, I don't know, updating or something. I'm actually using Toolbox, so I will just say it. I'm using Toolbox to manage all my instances of Rider. And that is very convenient because if, for instance, a new version ships, like for our early access program, then you can install that from the Toolbox. And the big benefit compared to installing it manually is, first, you can have multiple installations side by side. So you can still remain, unfortunately, it's still loading. You can remain with a normal release and just have an EAP installation for, basically to try things. And also, if something really doesn't work for you, you have the opportunity to just roll back to the latest version that was installed. So that's quite convenient. Now, from here on, I will use my Rider Playground solution. And as you already see, this is one plugin that I really appreciate. Nyan Cat in my progress bars. But yeah, so far for that. This is the first look at Rider. And I don't even know where to begin here. I think let's start with navigation. Or no, let's see, it was import. Oh, sorry, I lost track a bit. Where was it? Generation. I don't exactly remember. Let's start with navigation then. Like I said already, we inherit all the resharper features. So, for instance, if you're here, you have a car type. Then with sorry, the derived types were not found. Oh my god, I was. No, I'm at the wrong place. Sorry. Lost my train of thought a bit. Anyway, if you have a type, then you can use the various navigation shortcuts. And of course, I can show you all the different ones, like going to derived type. Something quite interesting here is usually I would let people take a guess and tell me why is this type written in bold and these are not. So unfortunately, I can't. So I will just tell you. The bold ones are actually those ones that are inherited directly as opposed to transitively. Also, you can see this, for instance, has a little icon here to indicate that this is actually an abstract class. Now, one thing that is really important that also works in ReSharper, by the way, is whenever you have some pop-up that is showing a bunch of items to you, a result set, then you can just start typing to kind of reduce the result set that is shown to you, which can be with larger result sets, it's definitely helpful. So I can move to the derived type, for instance, in this case. Let's talk a bit about discoverability of features. So Alt-Enter, for those who didn't know, is more or less our main shortcut, also to learn about new shortcuts. Because when we, for instance, on this iVehicle type, choose the Navigate To item, then we can see all the navigation methods that are available from this particular place. So, for instance, declaration is a very simple one. Implementation to something that's quite of interest in this case, just to show you, are extension methods, for instance. So in this case also, we have a list of extension methods that are valid for iVehicle. Something quite interesting besides the typing to filter the result set is you probably noticed that these are sorted by relevance. So the top ones are more special, while the latter ones are more general. Yeah, in speaking in terms of inheritance chain. But also we have, let's go back here. We have something like consuming APIs, exposing APIs. I think consuming APIs is also a pretty new feature. Everyone who's using command handler will probably like this feature, because you can quite easily find command handlers for a particular event, let's say in CQRS. What else? Also, this is also quite a basic thing I think is important to know for Rider, is whenever you hit Alt-Enter, the items you see right now are just a suggestion, basically. So from here, we can search pretty much anything that Rider provides to us. And this is done just by typing again. So for instance, if like we had before, extension methods, then you could just type extension methods and you will see that. Let's say, what was this? Usages, find usages. This is also quite important. If you search for something, then even here, the shortcut is provided to you. So you can immediately see, okay, Shift F12. And let's remain with that for a moment. Let's see, tab placement. You can also change various settings from here. So for instance, I completely disabled my tabs because I completely rely on the navigation that Rider ships with. So from here I can change all the UI things and anything you can think of. One more thing about shortcuts is, another shortcut you probably have to remember is Shift. This brings up the find everything or anything. I always confuse those two, but they mean the same for me. Brings up this dialog where you can also search for anything related to anything, which is your code, settings, whatever, yeah, refactorings, etc. One thing that is quite important here is, if you hit, for me it's Shift Command A, then you get to the Actions tab. I think, and I learned this also previously, you can also use Tab to navigate through the tabs. And from the actions, there's something quite important. If you, for instance, search for usages again, then find usages. Let's go here. Then you see on the right-hand side, there's this little text here, which tells us press, for me, it's Options Enter, because I'm on Mac. Press Options Enter to assign a shortcut. So there is the options dialog that you can use to assign shortcuts to individual actions, but this is much faster. So even if, and I like this a lot, if you work on a colleague's machine, for instance, and well, nowadays it doesn't happen so frequently, I guess, but if something is missing for you and you just want to have fast access, then this is a good way. Regarding navigation, well, there's also quite important. Many people probably use and I did too until a certain point, use the Control tab navigation to switch between tabs. And as I already mentioned, I completely got rid of that. And that is for several other reasons regarding navigation. So if ever I want to go back to a file that I previously used, I use Control, comma. And I already typed the shortcut, and you notice this dialog keeps being open. So it doesn't just disappear and chooses the item that I currently selected to go to. But this dialog stays open, and as I mentioned earlier, from here we can again search for things. So even if they are on the left-hand side, have all the different tool windows that Rider has. Some we will also take a look at. But otherwise, yeah, you can also reduce that to the to show only the last edited items. And something, let's see, something you can also use from here. If you already know you want to have a split view, then you can use this shortcut, Shift Enter for me, to show it in a second pane and have the current file next to it. I actually also requested already to have the ability to use Control, for instance, to split horizontally, but we will see when this arrives. There is also, and this is something I regularly forget, recent locations. This is also quite insightful because it kind of works like the control comma, the recent files, which I've just shown. But it also gives you a context about things that were on this at this particular place. And let's see, also from here you can search, so that's handy as well. Even if you just remember, you know, the I don't know, line above something you read or something, I don't know. Again, here with changed only ability. If let's see, and I want to try this, I leave it to do here, and okay, I don't know anything. I don't know anything better. But if I go back to car test, let's say, and to program, and now I want to go back to the place I've written something, that's quite frequently the case. So I try to implement something, I get a bit distracted or not distracted, but want to see something, how it works. Then I can use the last edit location shortcut, which brings me immediately back to that. And that also works something like a stack. So you can always go back to the last location where you've edited something. So let's use that. And I'm actually here at my to-do. Okay, but yeah, we could leave it. And I could also show you that we have an to-do explorer, which is quite helpful if, for instance, you want to limit it to the current to the current file, for instance, or even to the change set. Change set is quite interesting, and change lists are used for the VCS integration, and I will probably get back to that a bit later. But for now, let's move on a bit and close the navigation chapter. Something else I can show you is probably import and simplification. Well, this is very basic stuff, but probably still good to know for someone who just starts using Writer. So whenever you copy paste something inside here, and let's go with this for a moment, then Writer can import that for you. In this case, it's the non-generic version. And let's say we also get a string here, and you know, string actually inherits from enumerable of char, right? And up here, you also notice we haven't imported the link namespace yet, but still we can see all those extension methods. We will see from which namespace they would be imported, and I can just complete, and those usings are imported for me. I think this is quite nice to focus on the code and not go back and forth, and it's also a convenient method to make all the imports that are missing. This type of missing reference goes one step further with the following I want to show you, and this is, I think I need to remove the NUnit the NUnit reference for a moment. Now I don't have NUnit referenced, and you see test is red. Also, I don't get any suggestion how I could get it. This is actually something that you can use, this find this type on NuGet feature. And this will search for the test attribute, and you can see NUnit is actually the first suggestion that we get. So I can just choose to install, Actually, that's also something we wouldn't see in the next webinar that we have planned. But Alt-Enter also works on the NuGet packages here. So second place where Alt-Enter works, and you can, for instance, bring up. I think, where is it? Show the license. Yeah, you can reveal the package folder in your global NuGet cache when you need that. You can navigate to NuGet.org to see description, etc., to the project license if that's important to you. Yeah, pretty much everything. And again, remember, filter to type. Okay, but let's add that, and just to finish with that example, and then we can go back here, and it should actually allow us to import the missing reference. Something that I just used, and that's also, you see I just brought up the Solution Explorer and the NuGet tool window. And I did that with a single shortcut, which is called restore. And hopefully I don't manage to remember how it's actually called, but that's still a good case to show you. Next thing, when you know about a shortcut but don't remember how it's actually called, then you go here to key map here, and then just type the shortcut. And now you see it's hide all tool windows, and it's not just hiding but also restoring. Hide all tool windows. Oh, let's try with this. Actually see where it is. Here, restore windows. Okay, it has a different, not a good showcase, but anyway, this one is used, and it works a bit for anyone who used the Zen mode, which basically hides everything and lets you focus on code. This is a bit similar, for me at least, and it will hide all the tool windows, and if you want them back, then you just hit the shortcut again. Okay, simplification. I think this in particular is something that we will also see with a couple of other inspections and quick fixes. So Rider, of course, comes with a lot of code inspections and lets you simplify code. So for instance, you see this expression here, and I think it's quite hard to understand. It's not exactly obvious what it means. It takes a while. But you can see with the, if you look down here, we have the inspection shown here. If you use the mouse, you can also see it here. I also have a shortcut for that, and it's called error description. F1, let's try this. Then you can also bring up the tooltip with your keyboard. But usually what I do is just hitting Alt-Enter and replacing. Replacing with something that Rider suggests. And I can probably do this multiple times. And now you can see in the second time I switched over to using method groups. And I guess this is much simpler to read and to comprehend than what it was previously. And I show you this because this is a quite obvious example, but writing code, I guess everyone went through this, that you end up with something that first made sense to how you approach the issue, but afterwards it's a bit reversed, let's say, or more complicated than it could be. Okay, what else? We have language injections. Let's go to editing. This was the wrong thing. Also, one thing that we introduced recently is, let's start in a different way. This is just a string, right? So like we have it now, it's just a string, a verbatim string, actually. But inside of that, there's an actual regular expression. And we have two methods how to mark that as a regular expression. Is first Alt-Enter and then mark as injected language or reference. So from here I could use .NET regular expression. Or I think this is the more reasonable approach for me, because it also reflects in source control. You can add this attribute here. I honestly have no idea if that is listed anywhere, but never mind. Usually if you work with regex expressions, then let's type something. Then you do it like this, regex. You pass the pattern, and this completion here already shows up because we have attributed with a library that basically ships with Rider. We have attributed that this particular type receives a regex pattern. You can also do this inside your own code, but then you have to reference the JetBrains annotations package. Yeah, I could use the NuGet feature, by the way, that I've shown earlier, but anyway. And yeah, with those, you also get completion inside strings, and can, of course, use much easier type something and have proper escaping, etc. Right. This is quite important too for me. I remember a time, and I originally started developing with the German keyboard. And I remember a time when I wrote a method and the curly braces, you wouldn't believe how inconvenient to type that is on the German keyboard. So what I ended up with is using a template. Not sure if we will cover that, but let's assume you want to type those curly braces a little bit easier. You don't want to go, I don't know, English keyboard works quite well, but we can actually use the complete current statement shortcut, which does the following for us. Boom. So it adds the curly braces, places our caret inside of that. And you might wonder, this is called statement, so a method is not particularly a statement, but this actually works with statements. So it's a bit poorly named, I would say, but it still works that way. So let's say I end up with something like that, and many times Rider just inserts the semicolon for me. Let's say from here, I just want to go back I just want to continue to the next line. I can use that shortcut and will add the semicolon for me. So semicolon support is quite a serious thing. If you're inside the braces and use semicolon, Rider will also notice that and just put it afterwards, because usually I don't know any case where this would be intended. The same with completing statements also works for if statements. So if you have something like this, and yeah, then you can also do that. Okay. Selection. This is something I cannot live without anymore, because I'll show you why. Refactoring our code to something that is more readable is very important. I spend ages as well, even if it's just my own code that I will probably read later. But I try to stick to something where I give good names, and basically just to have to read the left line of my code. So in this case, this is something I would avoid, for instance, having this large collection being inside of the for each. And if I walk here and want to refactor that, then I use the extend and shrink selection shortcut. So there's also a second one, which is called shrink. Then I can just use that shortcut and go back and forth and always select the next reasonable range of text. Yeah. So for instance, I would go here and say, okay, this, and I'm using the extract variable refactoring now. This is the even numbers, not even numbers. Even numbers. This is, I could continue and say this is the ordered numbers. And this is, well, you can guess where this leads. But this is quite helpful. And since ReSharper and Rider are all about use it your way, so use your own workflow, there's also a second version of extracting things that I want to show you, which is, let's say, if you don't want to select, but from here you would say, okay, this I want to extract everything before. I want to extract as a as a new variable, you can also type var here, which is the var postfix template. And then basically the same thing happens. And yeah, numbers again. Oh, I have numbers already. Then let's revert. Okay, multi-caret. This is again something whenever I need it, I don't want to miss it. And I will use a pretty dull example here, but I'm sure you will find something with a list of with a list of requirements or data that you at some point can use for that. So what I want to do is I have a class, and let's say I have binding flex. Is a very good example. Let's say, and this is even a bit more difficult, but let's say we want to have a field. We want to have a field for all of these members. Yeah. Then what I would do is something like this. I would use the select next occurrence a bunch of times, which is this is not the occurrence. Sorry, for me actually it's Control G. So in this case it will select. Okay, this one we will work just with the first. This is complicated enough. But now we have multi-carets, and then we could go to the next line, for instance, and select the member here. Then we copy, and let's go back to our multi-caret here. We insert that. Usually here it acts a bit funky because it thinks this is code. So what I would do is just unindent. Then I create the carets again, indent it again. Not exactly. It could work a bit more fluently, but anyways. Now I want to create a private field. Let's also make it read-only, and it's of type bool, let's say. We have a semicolon down here, and also we would like to fix naming right away while we are at it. So in this case, we can just select this and choose to, I think it's called toggle casing. So then we have toggled the casing of the first letter. We could also select the full thing to toggle casing altogether, but this will switch between upper, lower case, you know. And yeah, it really depends, but I've run into these situations a bunch of times, and this really helped. So we had selection. Yeah, let's go with postfix templates now. This is really my favorite. And you probably have an idea if you're working with a collection, how you do it. Often people are using the for each, or how do you say, not historically, but conventionally. People might use the for each template, which then creates the for each statement, lets us choose the collection, and we tap through and choose what we want to name our iteration value. Something that is a bit more, well, how you can impress your colleagues and even maybe yourself, if you use numbers. Now we basically set the context already. We want to iterate over numbers, so let's write numbers first. Now we can type for each, and it looks like we're using this as an instant method, basically. And if we complete, then most of that part that we had previously with the for each live template is already filled out for us. Yeah, you see numbers already correctly named. The next thing is, let's say we want to filter those numbers. And again, I will use the example of being even. This is a Boolean expression I just typed, but I can make this an if from down here. So let's make it an if, and then finally, I wanted to type yield, you saw that. And then finally use that number. And usually, so you can also be quite quicker if I just type n, number, yield, and it's yielding the numbers. And in the very end, usually, you know, what happens is converting that to link, just like I mentioned earlier. Okay, another place, and that I don't want to miss out, another place where I use that quite frequently is here. So besides the fact that I can show you that it Writer also works with top-level statements, let's type a record. So we have public. Here. It was acting funky. Public record, let's say person, and we have a first name and string last name. Yeah. Let's say you want to create an object from that. The usual way would be variable person something something person, right? So what I suggest doing, and that's pretty much the fastest way you can do, type the type name person and then do var. So that will introduce a variable, and you can tab through and rename it if you like. And we basically also have to fill out the name here. I will go with John Doe. And as you also see, this is also particularly support we introduced for top-level statements here. Types have to follow at the very last, so you can easily fix that and move the statement up. Also here, again, about new language support, usually because these reflect as properties, so you probably want to rename those to uppercase. And yeah, I can just do this and probably fix it in the whole file. And you can see it suggests the last name as well, and I'm done with it. Yeah, about new language features, I also want to show you the following. So I have a couple of examples still from C#8, but even C#9 is of course supported. And we also continue, just like in the latest version, we also introduced a couple of new features for C#8 stuff. So also just to make sure you check the webinar. Here, for instance, we can use the index from end expression. Here in the next place, and by the way, I should show you this. When I move through my code, I actually use two shortcuts a lot. So also when I try to fix stuff that I have left out while I was working or spiking things. There are two shortcuts, which is first next error in solution. So this is for anything that makes your code not compilable. And this is also something that you would see in the solution-wide analysis. I currently have it turned off. We might turn it on. Then you can just jump to the next error in your solution. And like right now, you see in enumeration, there is one, and I can use that shortcut to jump there, right? This is not actually a mistake, but anyway. What is the time, actually? I don't know how much I have left. You will tell me when I should stop.
I think that you have 10 minutes left.
10 minutes, okay.
About
fine.
10 minutes, yeah.
That's fine. And yeah,
okay, and I have a question here, but probably we'll leave it for the end of the session, because there is a question about differences between Visual Student and ReSharper compared to Rider, and what are the features that would convince somebody to switch to Rider. So probably it's things for the end of the session.
Yeah. Very quite a large question. But yeah, I will try that. Yeah.
So it's about 10 minutes.
Okay. So one thing about those using new language features in your solution, something that is quite important to know is you can apply those quick fixes in bulk. So going right here, you can choose to apply those to the full solution, and that is something I usually do. And then maybe while committing, I just review and see if everything is okay. And just made it not full screen. And here it's basically the same. We can choose to fix that particular thing in the whole method. So then you can see I am using declarations as opposed to statements and so on. I think I should show something about VS VCS support too. So let's see. Oh, this is still loading. Yeah, it did something funky. And for this, I will probably open a new solution. That's also something I want to show you, because while loading this here, this is a new, we could call it fix actually, but or a feature. But with the latest version, you don't have to wait so long until the Solution Explorer opens, and everything is loaded already, and you will also not lose the context from your last session you worked on Rider. VCS support is really important for me, and yeah, whenever you need to go back in history, this is a good place. You can search for anything you like here. As far as I know, this whole thing is cached, so the search should actually work quite fast. And you can also do funky stuff like only looking at changes in a particular directory. So for instance, here we could say we only want to check changes or commits that were applied to this particular context. Also, this is, let's see if I can show this. It's still loading, yeah. Unfortunately not, yeah, that was the report I received earlier. There's a very cool, now it shows. This particularly comes from a plugin which is called Git Toolbox, and that will show the when this particular line was changed the last time. So it basically works like Git blame, I think it's called. One more thing, and let's use this here. Local history is something people particularly like. And why? It's because whenever you work on something and you try different approaches, and it happened to me too, I revert everything and I think I no longer need this. And after a while you realize, okay, this was almost it. I should actually go back to this particular place. Some people just use intermediate commits for that. I did that too, to a certain degree. But what's actually even better is if you use show local history, and you can execute that based on a folder or a file if you like. But this will show you the history without you ever having to take action. It shows you what I've written in this particular file a couple of days ago. Let's make this a little bit smaller. And you can review that and you see, okay, I reverted a couple of things here. And so this really helps to never ever lose something that you were working on. Quite a helpful feature. Anything more about Rider in particular? I think not. Well, you have an integrated terminal, of course. That works great, but not exactly the mind-blowing thing. Run configurations are quite cool, also because you can chain many of them together. So whatever you can think of, like running front-end code, opening your browser, debugging your front-end code, you will find it here. You can add a new run configuration. In many cases, Rider will even create one for you. Like we use those run configurations for various places, also for executing unit tests, for instance. Something really worth knowing is that you can also create compound run configurations. In that case, you can select any of the other run configurations that exist. And just to showcase this, let's say we also have a batch run configuration, and afterwards I can probably only shows up after applying, but then we can choose both of them and basically have a single run configuration that will trigger both of them. Show history. Yeah, I think I'm mostly okay with showing everything. maybe one last thing that is here. When you have, and I actually already changed the severity, but if I reveal that, you see this is a possible multiple enumeration, and some warnings, some code inspections in your code might even be useful to raise to other severities. So in this case, I raised this to I have this particular inspection, and from here, configure inspection severity, I can choose to make it a hint, suggestion, warning, error. I hope we will redesign this, because I would like to not show this subdirectory or sub item folder, you know. But I suggest clicking here actually, then choosing the severity you want to have this, and then making a distinct decision where you want to save this, because in most cases it makes sense to use to save to the team shared layer. If you work in a team, you probably want other team members to have the same look on that code as you have, right? And generation, well, there's so much more. Actually, we have all the refactorings, of course, too. So for instance, you could change that signature here, typing RS, I think. Do it on the method declaration. And then, for instance, adding a new parameter, which in this case could be int. You see they have code completion here, just not the short version of int, but string builder, let's say. Yeah. Okay. And yeah, I think we can almost stop there. I want to leave some room.
Matthias, if you say so, we can move on to the questions. So yes. Maybe then, maybe right now you can answer the question regarding the comparison between Visual Studio and Rider. So maybe what are the key points that could like encourage somebody to maybe not the switch, but maybe try start your journey with Rider?
Yeah, I understand. So first of all, it's quite difficult to pin it to one particular feature. I think it's really the sum of very tiny features all together. Something that, like for instance, that local history, that is something we can't ship with ReSharper, or as far as I know, at least. There was some intent at some point, if I remember, but I don't quite remember. But what I can say is, with your ReSharper license, as far as I know, you can also try Rider. And it's really about discovering it. It's not something that I can put in on a certain feature that will convince you. Yeah, too difficult. And I guess everyone.
Yeah, of course, it's too difficult to just take one particular feature and move. Yeah, like I think that you went through the Rider like functionality techniques quite thoroughly, and as you said, there are so many like different things that adds up to this whole developer experience that's built this good tool of Rider. But and though I have one question from my side, and of course, audience, please write down your questions on our chat. And I wanted to ask if this list of the things that you've mentioned here during this presentation is available somewhere. Maybe this, I don't know, this repository is available somewhere to access it and to just play with it.
Yeah, this repository should be available. And let's go here, manage remotes. It's under my personal account.
Okay.
Seems at least Matt Koch /Rider -playground.
Okay.
Yeah. This is where you can check. But I have to be honest, I plan to, or we in a team plan to update another repository at some point. This is really my personal playground that I use. And like I said, I haven't shown anything web related because I'm not a web developer, unfortunately. But this is more like the core functionality I wanted to showcase in various places. And there's so much more technology or focused technology related, like Docker or Unity, Unreal. I mean, there's so much really to like, I think. And one thing I have to say about this, what thing would convince you? If you're on Twitter, then I would recommend following our JetBrains Writer account, because there we often do tweets about what the whole advocacy team likes about Writer, and I think that's a good way to stay up to date. Me personally, also, like I think I mentioned that at some point. I don't know when exactly, but I discover features also from time to time that I had no idea, but they existed for years, and this can be quite surprising in a good way, right? Working with a tool, and yeah.
Of course, if the tool is so packed up with different features, it's hard to get known all of them.
Yeah,
I get the feeling there is so much shortcuts that I need an extra keyboard for that.
that could be true. Yeah, I've seen someone using the Elgato Stream Deck to use shortcuts with Writer. And yeah, it's true. I mean, I have done meetup presentations over almost 3 hours at some point, and that was more like some things we also discussed more in detail, but it can take quite a while to showcase all the things.
That would be cool.
And yeah, thanks for that comment I just saw.
Yeah. It's from Harvard. There is some discussion regarding the performance comparing Visual Studio to Rider, but I don't know, Cezary, if you want to mention it here. But if there is anything worth mentioning here.
Yeah, one thing. Well, I haven't used Visual Studio in a very long time. I have to say, and some things that might be worth saying is, first of all, and this is really something that I initially loved about Writer. When I don't know if I still have I still have my solution up here, but let's close it and let's see. This is also a shortcut I use regularly. The open project from here, and then I can again choose and then new window. And then it takes very little time for my IDE to actually okay, this was not great, but to actually respond. And this doesn't feel laggy at all. So I don't have the actual syntax highlighting because the model is still running. But in any case, when something breaks, you just boot it up freshly, and you can continue, let's say, at least with your review or writing comments or browsing code. So right now you can also see, I'm not sure if it's fully loaded already, but even without having the symbols, let's say, I don't have the symbols fully loaded, but you still see I can navigate based on the file system. Yeah, because that is more like instantly loaded compared to the semantic model of your code. And also, I mean, I've seen Visual Studio now also announced they're moving 64-bit, right?
Yes.
And well, Writer had it first, just so that you know. But yeah, it just feels very responsive to me. And otherwise, you have to make your own.
It's a great idea to build in and write the Rider that it loads the project gradually, incrementally. It loads the most important part at the beginning, so you have the feeling of having the option to write something down instantaneously, and then it loads in the background additional things and the highlighting, symbols, etc. Yeah, so very important thing.
And
Yeah.
what about this fancy progress bar? Did I miss something? This is a default feature, or?
Yeah, I have a couple of plugins that I can really recommend to you. I didn't manage to talk about them. Cognitive complexity. If you know the cyclomatic complexity, this is much cooler. It was how to say, invented, or the metric came up with was someone at Sonosource. And this is really cool because you can see where are the most impactful places in your code that make it unreadable. Git toolbox, I mentioned that briefly. Heap allocation viewer, if you are about performance, then this helps to see which places cause allocation. The one you just mentioned is Nyan progress bar. There are a couple of others too. And shell script, I would recommend for bash scripts, or there's also a shell bash pro, I think, but that's even a paid plugin. And PowerShell also can't hurt as a .NET developer. Yeah, I think that's all. Since I just passed it, that's something I would like to show you. So I really love this, and hopefully it shows up, but I really love this cognitive complexity thing. I just have to see where it shows up. Unfortunately not here, but it's in build executor, I think.
Only clean.
So if you have a large method, and it seems I've increased the threshold so much, but usually it's shown here. This little icon will tell you what the complexity.
Yeah, there is the information here. It was the information, but only when you focus on this particular dot there, that was the tooltip that the cognitive load is that high.
Yeah, usually I just have it configured in a weird way, but otherwise you would sometimes, and I could probably just put an if here or a while. If I just stop, then you can also tell me I don't want to. Here, now the threshold is so high that that it will show simple enough, and as I add more of these, you see now it's mildly complex, and depending on your settings, this will also reflect as a code inspection here. And you can also see which particular fragments cause more impact to that value. If you click on it, then you see this little +3, +2. Yeah. So those are a couple that I would recommend.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, Matthias, thank you very much for the presentation, for this very thorough presentation of the techniques and different features in Rider. And I hope that we'll meet in person soon enough after the whole pandemic.
Yeah, I hope so too. Actually, we planned one just when this pandemic started.
Yes,
right?
yes, I can recall that you wanted to have the tour through the Poland, yes, to visit Krakow, Wrocław, Warsaw, yes, unfortunately. Yeah. But hopefully after the next season, will be very pleasure to meet you here in Poland.
True. And also, nevertheless, thanks for the invitation. So I hope it was helpful to some people. And if you have any questions, my Twitter handle, I don't know if I mentioned that, but this place here, just ping me. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Then let's head over to Idan.
Yes, but before that, we're going to have a 5 minutes break. So we'll start.
I think 5 minutes should be enough. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't click it. It's your role. Yeah. The time is okay here. So let's take 5 minutes break, and then we will pass the mic to Idan. And okay, so thank you, Matthias, one more time. Take care, man.
You too, everyone.
Okay, and it's time. It's break time.
Okay, we are back. So now it's time for Idan presentation. And I see that we got a question about .NET debugging in Kubernetes. Not sure if it was for Idan or Matthias, but I guess that Idan will be able to reply for that also.
I hope I will.
Okay, so Idan, the stage is yours. I'm disappeared and take your time.
Awesome. So yeah, thank you very much for having me. And Matthias, that was a really, really great demo of all the writers' features. And what I really like about it, how it can really make us all C# developers much more efficient. And this is basically also the premise of why we start having these, I think, webinars about Docker microservices, and specifically how it's related for .NET developers. So this presentation will actually start ramping up. And of course, we will need to start with introduction, because if we really want to talk about the cool things, we really need to make sure that everybody is on the same level. And I know some of you ate Docker for lunch, and some of you may be still waiting to understand what Docker is all about. And so that would be basically the beginning. I think the first 15 minutes, just for .NET developers, what Docker is, because it's a little bit different, I think, using Docker if you're a .NET developer or not. And what I will try to do is, if you use the Azure portal, or if you use Visual Studio, and maybe even Writer, you will be able to then start using and leveraging Docker functionality pretty easily and get into it. So the first thing that I want to cover is what is Docker Engine, and how that is actually related to virtual machines, and is that the same or not the same, or how you can actually compare the two of those. So just a short introduction of how virtual machine actually work. You actually have a physical computer, the metal, we call it, and it's running some host OS. And then you install a hypervisor, which is a small layer that allow you now to take a chunk of your physical computer and chunk it into chunk the memory into a virtualized machine, so it will be separated from the rest of the system. And the hypervisor is basically what enable all of that. Now, let's say I want to run some application on my virtual machine. The first thing that I need to do, I need to load the guest OS that will run inside the virtual machine into memory to actually run the application. And that is basically what we do when we are doing multi-services. We actually start booting up different virtual machine or containers down the line. And what we want really is just to run our application, not run the guest OS. Because as you can see in this visualization, it can take a lot of memory space. And this would be much better if we don't need to. And that is where Docker Agent, I think the genius of it came to be. And because we can see that we have the host OS already loaded into the memory. And the host OS can do a lot of things. It can create processes, threads, access to the file system, and even open sockets and network requests. We got all those things already implemented by the host OS. And what Docker actually is doing is basically creating this very thin layer that will mimic the API of the guest OS, but instead of actually implementing everything again, is basically just using the Docker Engine layer, tunnel those requests to the host OS API, and therefore leveraging the same resources. And what it actually gives us, it's now we can actually run much more applications on all kind of different operating system, but with much less memory and resources. Now, as you can see, when you're using Docker, you actually need to choose what operating system you want to run. You can use Ubuntu, which is a Linux-based image, and Alpine is another popular one, which is almost like bare minimum Linux distribution that is extremely tiny. And of course, you can actually run Windows OS inside Docker engine. Now, you will actually need to choose if you want, for example, on a single machine, you need to choose if you want to run Windows-based OS containers or Linux-based, but you can do it. Now, the size here are trying to emphasize a point. And currently running the Windows OS containers require more memory. And that is very important when you need to choose if you want to run your .NET application on Docker. You really need to make some choice here. And the basic here is, or the basic premise, you can use Windows containers or you can use Linux containers. Now, if your application requires .NET Framework with all the features that actually associated with Windows operating system, you will need to suffer from a large containers. But what you really get is the ability to run your legacy code inside Docker. So you need to take that into account. You can actually run, there is smaller distributions. You can use Nano Server. But again, if you're using Nano Server, your legacy code will not work and you will need to adapt it because Nano Server has much less feature set than a full-blown Windows container. Now, for Linux containers, like I said, Alpine with ASP.NET is 10 times smaller, 200 megabytes of a container. But you will only be able to run .NET Core on those. And I believe that will be the future development of as we move forward when it comes to .NET and containers. And with that, let's move to the next thing is about Docker, and that is images. What is Docker image? And again, let's compare it to what the virtual machine image is all about. So when you need to boot a VM, usually the first thing you do is you choose the base image. That could be like an install disk or some base image that you gather from a gallery or from Azure Marketplace and things like that. And then you boot the VM and you start run it. And after a while, for example, you finish installation, you want to pause it and you want to freeze it because you might want to go back to it later on. And what you can do as soon as you freeze it, you can actually create what they call a standard checkpoint, which basically hibernate your laptop. That is basically one-to-one of what is really going on, which basically we are saving all the new image, the disk, I would say, and also all the memory that actually been used by the virtual machine. Now, the base image actually contains the entire operating system. Probably the image that we are now creating have some few things that we change, but there are not a lot. So the idea too is compressing the changes. And we are not storing the complete VM image. We only store the delta from the original one. And now we can continue and do it again and store a new delta. And at some point, we can also create a production checkpoint. What a production checkpoint is all about is basically we shut down the VM before we take a snapshot. So what we really need to save is just the delta for the disk. Now, if you understand that kind of a sequence, well, we can now really make it very close to what Docker is all about. Now, before we go to Docker, it's something very important that when you run your VM, it will actually load all the layers that you did until the current state when, for example, when you actually run the VM. It will actually need, every time you need to access the disk, it will go through every checkpoint to see if that block on the disk has changed or not, and it's stored on that checkpoint. And if not, it will go to the second checkpoint and then until it go to the base image. And that is basically the same idea with Docker. Now, the cool thing about it in Docker images, because we're actually using the system of the host OS, we don't really need to store a complete view of the physical disk with all the blocks and the free blocks and all the things that require to actually run a virtual machine. We can just do it in file-based image. So basically just tell which files are changed and what is the new content, which really, again, help us reduce those images and also make it very quickly to go and figure out which image have the latest layer of the file. Another interesting thing, and that is the container layer. This is where all the changes of the running container will actually happen, if you run the same container from the same image on the same machine, the host OS can actually leverage and even make better use of the memory and actually store all the base images and the read-only Docker images once in the memory, and then the two containers only need to store the changes that they did. Again, better efficiency of actually leveraging the host operating system. Now, a very cool feature about Docker is how we actually generate those Docker images. And that is based on a Docker file, which is a list of commands that actually allow you to then build those Docker images and run the containers. Now, for .NET developers, and we will see in a minute, specifically if you use Visual Studio, I'm sure Rider has the same capabilities to just get you started. And those Docker files probably would be very boring for you as a .NET developer, and they will almost look the same for every project that you will do. Now, let's just get into it to really understand what is going on. So as we can say, we need to choose the base image that we want to start our container from, and this is this line. We are using the .NET Core SDK 2.2 in this example. And then we tell, yeah, let's copy this CS project file to the inside the Docker container and create a new image layer for that. This line is even nicer because this is basically like running a VM and create a production snapshot after it. And basically what we do here, we run a .NET restore command inside the Docker that will restore all the NuGet packages for us. And when that command finished, then we will create an image with all the updated files. And that's basically how we're going to build the entire project for us. And with that, let's actually jump to Visual Studio to actually see how we can do those kind of things. So here I have this small project, small Visual Studio project, .NET Core. And if you right-click on a project and go to Add, you can now add Docker support, which basically will create a Docker file for you based on the template of the project that you have. So getting started with Docker is pretty easy. And with that, let's just go back to talking about debugging. Now that we finished the introduction, let's get into the meat of things. How do we debug? So just to understand how debugging happens in a normal situation when you have a C# API, the way Visual Studio or Rider communicate with the C# and debug it is by using the OS debugging API that basically allow you to change specific location of the code, to add breakpoints, and then get notification that the breakpoint hit, and also inspect the memory of that process. Now, the problem that we have in containers is that this now process is not running on the host operating system anymore. It's now running inside the container on a different OS. And with that, let's see how Visual Studio enable us to quickly debug a C# application inside the container. So before that, let's just introduce our victim for the day, which is where we're going to debug and crash down the line. We have this really small microservices example. We have a view-based UI that then communicate with several services. Let's just refresh it a little bit. And what this is all about, it's about a night school for superheroes, and this is the admin panel. And we have several courses here, and we have this algorithm that will run and schedule for each course. It will schedule the right rooms and then assign student to this course. That's basically the premise of everything here. Now, we want to debug it with Visual Studio. And I have all those Docker running locally, so it will be a little bit easier for us than connecting to a Kubernetes cluster here. And we want to debug, let's say, the service A, which is responsible for the rooms. Actually, no, the courses. How we will do that? Now, because it's actually running inside the container, we need to go and do attach to process because we want to attach to our already running container. And usually when you do attach to process, it will actually show you here all the processes that you have, but we will actually choose something else, and that is the Docker Linux container, because I'm using a demo here that use Linux containers. Now, what will happen right now is Visual Studio will then refresh and show me all the running containers right now on the system. Now, let's understand how that actually happened. It's basically running the command docker ps. That's basically what happened behind the scene to see all the Dockers that I have running here. So we will choose the service A1. And now you will see that Visual Studio actually then inspect what happened inside the container and show me that I have one of them that I can choose to attach to. And that basically do the command docker top with the Docker that we want, and it will basically do the same thing, list the process that we have. So let's attach to it, and we need to choose what we want to debug. In that case, we would like to debug the manage part of the process. And then launching debug adapter. And that is basically the magic of how that actually come to be. And we will just let it finish, and then we will run several commands to actually understand what's going on. Let's give it one more minute. So it will actually be able to connect to the Docker container. We might need to restart Visual Studio. No. Threatening always work. So now we actually see that we actually got connected, and we will put a breakpoint here on the get status, which basically you can see here that the UI just go into some health checks. And we can see here that it's still waiting. So probably we actually hit that breakpoint. Now, here we can actually go and see that we have all the courses, and we can go and inspect every local variable, get deeper, do step into, step out, all the things that you expect from a normal debugging session. Now, how that actually happens, how we actually able to then bridge between two different operating systems. And for that, we will actually do another cool thing, and we will actually run docker top again. And here we can actually see that we got a little bit more stuff happening in our Docker right now. Before that, we only have one process, which is the .NET Service DLL, and it's still running here, process number, 27781. But you can see there is another 3 processes, which basically this one run, this one run, this one. But basically what happened behind the scene, what Visual Studio did for us, it's basically installing VS Debug inside our container and then run it and attach it to the process inside the container. And because we actually running the command, when we execute command inside Docker, let's just clear the screen, we can do Docker exec with in an interactive manner and just run a shell. And what that actually allow us, it allow us to connect the STD in and STD out from our host machine to the process that we now running inside the Docker container. And that is a basic idea behind how Visual Studio allow us to debug C# application inside Docker's container. And if we will just try to visualize it, what actually happened is Visual Studio will inject VS Debug into our container, attach a native debugging API to this C# application and using the stdio, so basically if that container actually happened in a remote server, then this stdio will need to run over the network as well. So your debugging speed probably will suffer from that. Now, let's talk about the implication and where we actually start talking about advanced debugging. What is different when debugging Docker than debugging normal, I think, single or monolith application? And you can see here with this visualization that there is this running spinner here that say that we are still waiting for that service to respond. And we will actually need to then press continue to actually allow it to run again. And now we hit that press point again to actually release that freeze in the system. So let's just remove this breakpoint and stop the debugging session so we can actually talk about the implications of this delay, that we have a different microservice, the UI layer, that is actually waiting on service A. So let's get deeper into that. So when we actually pause and put a breakpoint in that C application, our container is running. And as you can see, there was several processes. We can connect a shell to it. So from the outside, a debugged process is same as an unresponsive process to the world, which is a problematic because, like we say, we have the UI that actually access this process. So our container that we debug is frozen, and now we have a different container that we don't debug, but is waiting on us. So at some point, if that was a UI, it's not really an amazing example, but if that was another microservices that actually need to serve a different microservices, that bottleneck could actually start propagate and create this cascading effect that by us just debugging one element of the system, posing that element, actually start creating all kind of different behaviors in the system and might cause other services to drop. And if we have an orchestrator that actually then try to manage several versions of the same container to have better reliability, then we will have another problem here because the orchestrator will do its own health check to make sure that our container is alive. And at some point, if we take too long to debug and understand what is going on, the orchestrator can say, hey, this container is not responsive anymore. I would stop sending network traffic to that container. And then you cannot really continue debug your session because no more traffic will get into your container that you're trying to debug. And if depends how you use your orchestrator, the orchestrator can say, well, if that container is not responsive, let's kill it and start a new one. So basically, you will also lose your debugging session while you're trying to debug it. And we can actually go and list all kind of issues that you have when it's come to debugging container. And they all actually stem from the same issue. And the same issue is that when we thinking of debugging, usually we're thinking about what we call intrusive debugging. And what is intrusive debugging? Well, basically, when we debug, we do two operations. One, we extract the information from the system. And which mean by that, we are looking at local variables, we look at the call stack, we look at what other threads are doing. And then we try to reason about it. How did we get here? And then we do step through and step into, step out, try to figure out what is going on. Now, the interesting thing about it is that extraction usually happen for us by the IDE. And that can happen in computer speed. It can have a few milliseconds and you can get all the local variables that you will probably look into. And the reasoning, it's human speed. It's extremely slow when it comes to system operating system. But the problem is that we do both of them at the same time. That's why we call it intrusive, because we actually freezing the process for us to reason what is going on at that specific point of time. And when it comes to Docker, I think we should really move into a different mindset and basically separating those two operations and start doing non-intrusive debugging. basically extract the information from the system without freezing it, and really to try to understand it. That is the premise. Now, you might never heard the non-intrusive debugging term before, but I believe we all do it already. Even when we just start coding in C#, console write line is the classic non-intrusive debugging. You basically write, I was here, and we didn't get to that if statement. That is the basic things. Now, after a while, when you start having those, you might save those console write line into a file, and then you will start searching for things. Now, when we start searching for logs, then I think the next generation start happening. And if you use Serialog, you already know that. Then I think the next generation was structural logging. Now, instead of actually concatenating everything into a string and then write it to a file, you actually create those templates, like string format, but you actually save the entire format and structure into your log files, so you will have much easier time to filter them. In that example, I can now say, give me all the log that are level warning and that the edge argument is larger than 10 or 18, if that is age. That might make more sense. And that really help us to find the lines that actually help us resolve this issue. Now, we're talking about microservices, and microservices are distributed by nature, and that's where actually open tracing and correlation IDs start popping up into our logging, which basically mean that every time a service create a request with gRPC or HTTP or whatever channel do you have, it will actually add a transaction ID to that as a header or in some other mean, and then the log, and it will actually add that transaction ID into the log, and the other services will then use that to continue describe that, hey, I'm working on transaction number 42, and now I can, because it's everything is structural, I can say, show me all the logs that are related for a specific transaction that happened. Now, all of those things actually have very cool tools, and you see a lot of companies today. And I heard this interesting quote that in modern system, the number one budget is no longer CPU. It's actually databases and logs, which is pretty crazy because we're really creating a lot of logs. Because why we create those logs? Because I think this is the catch-22 in non-intrusive debugging. What intrusive debugging allows us is to pause the system in one place and then reason about it and then understand what we want to do next. But with non-intrusive debugging, we need to understand what we want to record ahead of time. And the funny thing, if you knew where the bug was, you would probably already had the right logging so you can resolve it. But you don't know what the bug is, so you're just guessing. So you had this line of log and this line of log and this warning, and then maybe you had another argument until you really find the thing that you're actually catching on. And today, if you use CI/CD pipelines, every time you want to add a log line, that's actually a new deployment. So it will take time until you actually get it. And that's why I really think that it's time for Generation C, and that is production debugging or live debugger. And that is basically how can we actually merge non-intrusive debugging with the debugging experience that we all know and love, the intrusive, see the code, step through, and really understand what is going on. So with that, let's just dive into a demo to see how live debugging actually look like. So previously, I actually installed our Oscode production debugger, and we will see how that would help us debugging issues that happen on the service. So we will go back to the courses and we start schedule this one. Everything works. And then we will try to schedule this. And something went wrong. And what we will do here, it will actually go. We have a SEC server here. And we will then look at the logs that the system generated, and we will maybe just filter logs and click on here, and then we see a stuck trace. So now what we will do, we will actually get all available rooms. Maybe that is the problem. So we will actually go to our Visual Studio and try to find it. And then we really need to figure out, wait, what happened? What course was that? Basically, that is the best thing that you can do, which is trying to look at the logs, figure out the issue that you had, and figure it out from there. But we believe there is a better way. And if we will go here and just we can see that the production debugger agent actually captured 2 errors, one from service A and one from service B. And it tells us that is in a capturing mode. And that is really important because that will give me opportunity to explain what is really going on here. And that is the agent will wait for exception to happen. And as soon as the exception happen, we will actually inspect the call stack for that exception and in real time add instrumentation to those specific code path. So next time that exception happen, we can really have a different experience of debugging. So with that, let's just go and do it again. Amazing. We got the error once, and let's just go and refresh it. And now we can see that it was captured. So let's just go and see what we got here. So there is a lot of windows here, so let's just take them one by one. We can get some general information about the exception. This timeline, I really like it because this is start showing the capabilities of distributed tracing. We can see that this is the original request that we did, and this is another request that actually created by our service to service B, and that basically failed. So maybe that is a hint what is really going on. But here we can actually see what non-intrusive debugging is all about. And that is, you can see the call stack here, as we see before in the logs, but here you can actually see a decompiled version of that code that caused that exception. So you actually go in time above from the beginning to when the exception actually thrown. And as you can see, as I switch between those 2 methods, I actually see a capture of all the local variables. And I can see I can get inside that and get deeper and deeper in what is going on here. Now, sometimes we want even more. And we really want to understand how we got here. There was an interesting research in, I think in Microsoft that say that if you can actually go back 100 instructions before exception happen, you have 90% chance of really see what caused the state to fail, the state to be broken and then cause the exception down the line. And that is basically what we do as developers. We try to go back in time to where things really messed up. So here we can actually ask the production debugger to do it for us by requesting a full capture of that error. So let's just go back to this main screen, and you can see here now it say that it's capturing full-time travel. So let's go back in time. Let's regenerate this error again and refresh. And now you can see it's fully captured, and the icon changed to show some kind of a movie. Now, if you use Oscode Visual Studio extension, you will already know this visual language. But let's just, if you don't, let's just go over it really quickly. We can actually see how our code was executed every step of the line with what the argument were. And we can actually see that this if statement where this argument was evaluated to false. So we highlight that in red. So this chunk of code was never executed. And this one evaluated to true. And because this is a lazy evaluation in C#, this will not even evaluated, so it's struck through. And we can see here the exception was thrown. And you can actually see that entire thing for the entire call stack that actually caused that to happen. And with that, another cool thing, you can also see all the logs that are related to that exception that we captured here. Now, you see here, this is current request context. And the reason we can do that, which is basically trying to filter the logs that are already relevant, because we actually capture the async context of that method and only show you the logs that are relevant to this specific request. And with that, let's move to a different section of debugging production systems. And that is what happens if, let's go to this one, for example, when we schedule something, we get a result, we didn't get any notifications that something went wrong. And if we will go and do a refresh, nothing new happened, but we get to rooms, no students, something is wrong, right? Now you want to debug it. So the usual thing is just to go and try to figure what happened in the logs. But again, we believe there is a better way. And for that, we introduce trace point session. A trace point session really allow you to use what we call live debugging experience for production system. Now, because there is multiple developers, one production system, usually we allow you to create different debugging sessions that will run in parallel on this system. And now you can actually get this very similar Visual Studio or Rider experience of finding the code that you really want to debug. So we want to debug the course services. So let's just go to our course controller. And we have a method here that's called resolve schedule. And we want to figure out what happened with the new schedule. So we will just put a breakpoint here and then say, we got a new schedule for course. And I can use these curly brackets to basically use those, to use local arguments and local variables. And for this example, we just do the course ID. And now we actually added this trace point. Now, again, I haven't mentioned it before. When the agent actually captures an exception, we actually remove all the instrumentation from the code to run in the original performance that he had. Same thing with trace points. The cost of a trace point is basically the cost of adding log lines. And when you create a trace point, nothing really happens until you click Start Collecting. And when happens Start Collecting, we actually then send to all the Dockers that we are debugging at the moment that have this symbol to start collecting those trace points and report them back to us. So let's go and do this schedule. Go back here and we can see we got a new our first hit. So we can see the code, we can see the event, the logline message that we created. And here we can actually go and inspect all the local variables at that specific time that we wanted. And you can go several level deeps here to really see what happened here. And we can already see the problem. No lectures room, only practice room. So probably that is the problem. So maybe the problem that there is no available rooms anymore for lectures. So let's just go to the rooms controller. And again, same thing in, you have similar to Control T, search all the symbols. And let's just go to rooms controller and get available rooms here. So let's put one breakpoint here. No rooms found. Or let's put one here. We found rooms, and you can see here I get this nice IntelliSense with features and features. Amazing. Now, because our session is already running, those trace points actually get added immediately as I created them. So let's just go do another schedule. Now, just to emphasize the point here, let's add the, where is that? Service name. So just to pause and see really what happened here, we actually had 3 trace points. One in service A in one container, and one for service B in a different container. And if we have multiple instances of those containers, we basically add a trace point to all of those containers at the same time. And that is pretty cool because that really gives you this seamless experience of debugging several microservices together without really pausing the system. And as we can see here, both methods actually return rooms, and we can even inspect which rooms there were with all the depths that we want. So that was not really the problem. So let's go back again to this resolve schedule to figure out what is really going on. And we see there is this method find available rooms. Let's go find available rooms. Amazing. And we can see here there's this warning that failed to find available rooms. So if we will go and search the logs for that, we might even find this log line, but it doesn't really give us the context that we need. So let's add another line here, and let's solve this bug. And yeah, we actually get to this point. And that really tried to, what I really try to emphasize here is really solving this catch-22, that I don't really know what I want to log, but I want to know when we get to this point. And the way we're actually solving that is by basically capturing the entire state of the local variable at that specific moment of time. And you can see here, we have available rooms because we know that. And we see that the max capacity is 10, but room 2 is null. We didn't find anything from this method find optimal room. And we can see here this function get another property, desired room capacity, which is 20. So that's probably the issue, that we wanted room with 20 capacity, but the largest one was 10. So we just didn't select any room. So now we can actually go and fix the problem. And that really solved the, I think, flip the problem on its head, that let's not try to waste our time, try to reproduce production issues locally, because sometimes just to generate the production issue, you need the state of the user, you need the exact load, you need the exact setup. Instead, let's debug the Docker where they're actually running live and then fix it. And with that, I think we will just go to Q&A. Actually, one more thing. Let's just remove the errors here. You can see here that when we search now the logs, we see this message, we found rooms count 12 with features, which is basically trace point that we added. When you deploy the agent, you don't need to do any code changes. You don't need to connect it to source control or anything. It will just work. However, if you put some love into it, you can actually then integrate those trace points to add logs to your already existing logging infrastructure. And what it would actually do here, and if we would click and do expand all, you can actually see that we added the URL for that trace point hit. So now you can see in your logs that, yeah, we have this line, but if we will just open the URL that we have here, it will open the production debugger and point at to that exact hit. So you can actually go and see all the local variables that generate those logs. So what I want to emphasize here, if you have missing logs, you can actually use the production debugger to add those nodes dynamically in real time, debug the issue that you want, and when you're done, hit the pause button, and all those log messages would be removed from your code. So you don't need to spend a lot of time and money storing all the logs just for the small chance that you probably might look at them. Now I'm really done. So if there is questions, I would really be happy to answer them.
Right now, I can't see any question, but I must admit this tool looks really impressive. So
Appreciate that.
Is it available in trial version, or we can go? Is there a website where we can get a free test drive with it?
Yeah. Go to app@osgo.com. I would just go to that site, so you can see here. app@osgo.com. You can get a free trial for development purposes. You can just go and spin it and enjoy that. If you want more, if you really want to put it in production, then there is some price involved, and that is when you actually need to protect sensitive information of your clients. So when it's come to compliances and things like that, that is where pricing actually coming into place. But for development processes, and if you want to take it for a spin, just take it.
Yeah, I definitely need to try it. It's pretty cool. Ellen, do you have any questions?
No, particularly not. I'm just impressed by the amount of information that we can get from a single container like that. Yeah, I see that Michal is also amazed by the amount of the information. So does realize as Cesare said, I'd like to try it on my own in the production, and maybe not in the production, the development application first, and then. And
as you can see here, we actually now show you, I believe, the Docker route, right? But if you're using Azure and, for example, app services, you can just follow the installation here to do that. So if it's running C#, probably you can use it. So yeah, just give it a spin, and we would really love to hear feedback from you guys.
Okay. Yeah, there is another positive feedback from Martin Gruszyński. So yeah, it's clean. It just looks amazing.
Okay, then thanks for this insightful walkthrough through these debugging tools. And if that's all, then we got one more announcement.
Okay.
I'd like to remind. Oh, we got.
There is another question. Does this happen?
Yes. So the answer is yes. If you will go, installing on your own server is actually almost the easiest route. Depends on if you have Docker, then we already talked about that. But if you install it on a Windows machine, a virtual machine, or actually physical server, just download and run an installer, and you're basically done.
Yeah, so it looks super easy to start. So, Paweł, we strongly recommend you to take that path. Okay, so Cezary, back to you.
Right. The survey. Let's put that on the screen. I would like to remind you about the survey. Please fill it out, and the survey stays open till Sunday evening. So as I said before, if you are not watching us live and you are planning to watch us maybe over the weekend, you still get an opportunity to send your feedback, to rate today's presentations, and of course from people who fill out the survey will raffle gifts from our sponsors. So we really appreciate for sharing your rates about today's meeting. And,
yeah, so please leave any comment and information. We'll send the service to the speaker later on. So please share any insightful information.
There are two important fields in the survey. Of course, you can rate it using stars from 1 to 10, but there are two fields when you can write what do you think about those presentations, and those one are the most important one. So I see that Ilan is expecting a lot of comments there, so don't disappoint him.
Yes, please share any comments. Somebody said that the feedback, the information after the presentation are the most valuable for the presenters, because they get a lot of information back.
Yeah, we really want to make something that would be valuable for you. So anything that would help us make these talks more valuable, we will appreciate that.
Okay.
I think that's all for today, and see you on May.
Yes.
Bye.
See you next month. Bye-bye.
All right.